Healthy during a crisis, you must have access to safe, clean water. Water which will not be available at your local grocery store.
There's a mad dash on right now to stock up on supplies.
The ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system is a must-have for every modern, independently minded household. Protect your family's safety during an emergency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com today to purchase your ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system or call 1-888-253-3139.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been marching through the streets of Mexico in recent weeks. They are protesting against the government's response to the disappearance and likely massacre of 43 students there. So just to give you a little bit of background, 2 months ago, 43 students in Mexico disappeared after police opened fire on buses that these protesting students were in. They killed 6 people, wounded 16 other students, and those who didn't manage to escape were then handed over to a local drug trafficking gang. And then, according to taped testimonies, 3 men who identified as the killers said they took the group of 43 or 44 young students to the dump and used diesel, gasoline, and tires to burn the students in a fire that lasted for 15 hours. Now, why all of this? Well, according to an investigation by the country's attorney general, the mayor there ordered the police to detain the protesting students because he did not want them to disrupt his wife's political speech. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Mark Katz. He is a 20-year resident of Mexico, and he's here to just give us a little bit of insight into the collapsed state of Mexico. It is basically collapsing under the weight of corruption. So, Mark, thank you for joining us. Now, before we get into this particular story, can you just kind of give us an idea of what's the atmosphere like there in this country?
Okay, well, the first thing is, Mexico is actually quite a rich country. It is now the 11th largest economy in the world in nominal GDP terms. But of course, the income distribution is a problem. In GDP per capita, it's about 65th on the list. Currently, there have been 6 major structural reforms passed in Mexico over the last 2 years by the current president, who's from the PRI party. And each of these is actually like Obamacare on steroids. They all require constitutional changes, et cetera. So any freedom for the people that existed before has basically been stamped out on paper. And the people are generally upset with the government. One of the biggest differences, I would say, between Mexico and the U.S. and Canada, where I'm from, is that the people here don't have any illusions about the government. They know that the government is not on their side. They don't believe a word that the government says. So that's a little bit of the background to this particular incident in Ayotzinapa.
And I guess that kind of leads us now to the probable massacre of these 43 students, maybe due to some of these reforms, is why you mentioned that they happen to commandeer buses, and they'll commandeer these buses that will help take them to protests and other events like that, because they've had a lot of budget cuts, if you will. So bring us up to speed with how could something like this happen, and just kind of talk to us about this story a little bit.
Okay, well, a little background to this particular incident in the state of Guerrero. The state of Guerrero has a long history of civil protest, social resistance. This goes back to the 60s, the 70s, in what was called the Dirty War, where the government cracked down against all kinds of social groups. Now, the school that these students are from is called Escuela Normal, and it's basically a school for very, very poor rural students to go and become teachers, to go and teach in other rural schools. And part of their training there is, besides the government curriculum, is they actually get trained in, we could say, social issues with a bit of a Marxist bent. There's no question. but they are perhaps, one of the only institutions in the country where, where the people here are getting more of the real story, so to speak, more of the things that would be discussed here on INFOWARS,
Mm-hmm.
So because the government, there's been a campaign against these schools for many years to shut them down, to disappear them, in fact. And this incident, this current incident is nothing new. There have been disappearances and killings of social activists in Guerrero, like I said, from the 60s, from the 70s, but even recently, in the last couple of years under the governor who resigned over this incident and the mayor who was arrested, because he went on the run over this incident. There have been many, many activists who have been killed or disappeared. So the difference with this current incident is just the magnitude of it. 43 all at one time. It's a little bit of now as to why something like this would happen. That's really the big question that there are no clear answers. All these incidents, every time something like this happens in Mexico, it's got to be the most bizarre, surreal, truth being way stranger than any fiction situation. Always, there's always multiple contradictory versions. And of course, the government keeps changing their official story on a daily basis, basically.
Right. It's so unbelievable for me to think that a mayor could order the police there to take these students, how it got so out of hand to where they're actually firing upon students, killing innocent bystanders, as well as some students there. Then they hand students over to a drug cartel who kidnaps them, and according to 3 of them who say they were the killers, they burn them, throw them in this pit, and burn them for a period of over 15 hours.
Government officials say the charred remains were so badly burned, some turned to dust upon contact, although they stressed every effort would be made to identify the bodies. Officials say a group of corrupt police working with a local drug gang abducted the students after clashes in the state of Guerrero in late September.
All because the mayor didn't want them to disrupt his wife's political speech.
Right.
I mean, that's just insane. Here we're protesting against, police killing people here, unarmed teen Michael Brown, of course. But this is like to the nth degree of political corruption here. And then you're dealing with the police that are in collusion with the drug cartels who kind of have ties to the mayor. I mean, does this sort of thing just happen, I guess, 2006 really with the drug war, but has it been going on a very long time? Did this just happen overnight, so to speak?
Oh, no, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. Of course, Alex always says that Mexico is a failed state, and that is true in some ways, but it is not necessarily a failed state. It's a mafia/narco state, and this incident really highlights that. There's a fine line or no line between the narcos and the politicians. They're all bought off. They're all in cahoots some way or another. And in this particular case, I don't know if you realize that the mayor's wife, her father and brothers were actually part of the cartel that supposedly took these students. So, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. I mean, there's there were actually many complaints about this mayor, for at least a year or more. So it was well known that this mayor was, potentially in bed with the narcos, literally in this case.
Yeah.
And they didn't do anything about it. The governor didn't do anything about it. The president didn't do anything about it. Also, since the drug war happened in 2006, 2007, there has been a militarization of the police here along the same lines as in the U.S. And in fact, that militarization is funded by the U.S. through Plata Arida.
But they're not protecting the citizens. I mean,
Of course not. Of course not. Now, the other factor here is, the military themselves, because there's a military base not too far from where this incident took place. That military base has been accused of protecting the opium trade, which is centered on the city of Iguala, where this incident took place. There are reports that the commander of the base was actually sitting right next to the mayor during that, during his wife's political presentation, so to speak, during this incident. So there's a lot of questions as to what the military's involvement is and what they did or did not do during this incident as well.
right, it was so insulting. They basically said, well, we didn't know what was going on because we were too busy dancing and drinking wine at this party, so we had no idea that these people were being killed. Meanwhile, the mayor's the one that orders this hit. And it's also very telling. Attorney General Murillo basically dismissed a question. They wanted to know why soldiers nor federal police intervened when the municipal police were shooting and attacking these students. And he said, if the Army had come at that moment, who would they have supported? Obviously, the answer would have been the legal authorities, basically saying he wouldn't have even helped. They wouldn't have helped the students. They would have just joined in with the police who were shooting at these buses. Well, so we know that, you sent me an email. You said that obviously tens of thousands of people took to the streets yesterday, but this isn't even the biggest planned event. That one is coming up here December 1st. So what do people need to know? What can people do for this situation?
Well, the thing about these particular protests is that they're relatively widespread, and there's no real central organization. Now, there was a national strike being talked about for yesterday, the 20th of November, which is the anniversary of the revolution, the Mexican Revolution. But they apparently decided to move the national strike to December 1st. Now, all of these protests going on, both in Mexico and worldwide, I mean, it's unprecedented in the global sense. But one thing, people have to realize about these protests here in Mexico is that, there are protests of this magnitude happening, I mean, almost literally every day. I mean, Mexico City has been paralyzed.
People are outraged. I mean, rightly so. The entire country is outraged. They are burning buildings down, and rightfully so. I can't blame them.
Now, we have to be careful with these acts of vandalism, because there's a lot of indication, and it's my feeling personally, that these are provocateur incidents, really, because the one that took place a couple weeks ago where they burned the door of the National Palace, basically the police stepped aside, they let them do it, they didn't stop them. So one has to really ask what's really going on. This is very reminiscent of a lot of the incidents that took place, let's say, even in Toronto during the G8 summit, where they turned over a police car and they basically let them do it. I mean, it's very, very reminiscent of those types of things. Now, the other thing I'd like to point out is that, there have been massive protests on other issues here. For example, the education reform, which was, by the way, written by the OECD, basically. There were massive protests here of the same magnitude, hundreds of thousands of people, for the better part of a year. And nothing happened. There was no action taken by the part of the government. The government is very good at sitting it out, basically. Letting the people go out and protest, but in the end, nothing really changes.
Right, and that's what's really troubling. Well, thank you so much, and I think that we'll probably check in with you to see if anything is going to be happening now with one of these bigger protests. But obviously, keeping on this story, I mean, I feel sort of helpless. I mean, what really can people do? The corruption is so rampant there. But thank you so much, Mark, for calling in and breaking this down for us.
Glad to be here, Leanne.
And this is why it is so important for us to check corruption. When it's allowed to set policy unimpeded, what you'll end up with is a mafia-style government who's just